Welcome to Issues That Matter. I'm Cynthia Pooler. My guest today is Diane Sare, and Diane and I are going to talk about January 6th. I remember that day quite well, and of course, we've seen the videos over and over again on TV. So what's your thoughts?
Well, we haven't really seen the videos. I mean, they have a whole bunch of classified videos that people haven't seen. And right before he was kicked off of Fox News, Tucker Carlson began showing some of the videos, which tended to indicate that what the defendants, the so-called insurrectionists, were saying about it was true, that the police directed them in that they were nonviolent, that they were frankly rather respectful of the place. I mean, obviously, some of them were not, but I would point out that the, I think 5 people died, and those were all Trump supporters. Not police officers. One succumbed to, I don't know, some kind of stroke or something in the hospital. And you remember we were told that they beat him over the head with a fire extinguisher, which turned out, of course, not to be true. I actually think a good starting point might be, and it looks like, it's a poetic principle because Trump won the election. They're certifying it today. They're certifying the Electoral College vote today. And
Right.
because they made such a big deal about how it's basically criminal to think that there might be election fraud, they've tied their own hands. They're not going to be able to stop it.
So I'm sorry, actually, this is the anniversary of January 6th, January 6th, 2025. So I thought that would be an appropriate day to uh, to talk about 2021.
Yeah, so I got from the New York Times, of course, has a big article, and there's a few points they make, which I think people should consider. They think it's good. I don't think so. They say in the past 4 years, nearly 1,600 people have been prosecuted for being there. 1,600. The FBI was chasing people down for literally for years. A good friend of mine who's a wonderful bass singer is in prison now in North Carolina. They finally rounded him up from Facebook photographs, and they even admitted that contrary to the charges that he supposedly was attacking the police, the footage they have of him shows him helping the police, and he's serving 4 months in prison right now. So the FBI and banks, think about it. Banks, the FBI, like anyone who used their ATM card, their bank informed the FBI about this, that they were in Washington that day. So they used everything to surveil people and come after them for several years. There are 200 people still in prison in Washington, D.C. And they brag that they went after 1,600 people in all 50 states. And then Judge Royce Lamberth, whom I remember from years ago, he's a federal judge in D.C., um, because he was a big defender of Albert Pike, the Freemason who founded the Ku Klux Klan. So Royce Lamberth says that he's very upset. He said, quote, "I have been shocked to watch some public figures try to rewrite history, claiming rioters behaved in an orderly fashion like ordinary tourists, or martyrizing convicted January 6 defendants as political prisoners. How dare they call them political prisoners?" And I'll tell you a story about a friend of mine who had been a supporter, a financial supporter of my campaigns. And I called him one day to make a donation. And he said, "Diane, I can't give you a nickel. All of my bank accounts have been shut down." And I was joking. I said, "You didn't happen to be at January 6th, did you?" And he said, "Well, no, I didn't go, but I did pay for a video crew to film January 6th."
Oh, wow.
So just like what they did to the Canadian truckers, right, where their PayPal and their bank accounts and everything got shut down, this is the way that people were treated. And I think they did that because they wanted to look, the right to vote, having your vote counted, is a fundamental premise of democracy in this country. How can you have a representative government if your vote doesn't count?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very big deal. We owe it to the citizens to ensure that elections are verifiable, that people feel that it's transparent. It's one thing to say, oh, gee, I lost the election, but I know I really screwed up. I should have done this. I should have done that. You can get over that. But if you say, like what happened to my vote this time, I busted my rear end. I got out, 500,000 pieces of literature. I got 70,000 signatures to get on the ballot. And they say that I got 0.5% of the vote. That's just not credible. And I discovered it wasn't credible by going door to door in my own neighborhood and finding, without doing any work, I found twice the number of votes that they said that I had. And I think my vote might have been 10 times what they said I had, closer to 5%. So once that happens, Americans lose faith in the government. They don't feel they're represented. The congressmen don't feel under any threat. And I don't mean physical threat. I mean, they're supposed to listen to us, and the way that we get them to listen is we threaten to remove them from office by voting them out. But if they think they can never be voted out, then we'll go ahead, send Israel $8 billion, send Ukraine $200 billion. What the heck? I'm going to be in here forever.
Well, okay. So, you know, it's very mind-boggling to think that the government has gotten away with so much for so long. Um, Ultimately, why why did January 6th happen? What was in it for the Democrats to orchestrate this? If it is the Democrats that did it.
Well, if you're going to steal an election, and I would say it's not merely it's the marriage between the Democrats and the intelligence agencies. And I would say not just the American agencies, but British intelligence and others. Remember, or you may not know, the British House of Lords actually had a public, they released a transcript of a meeting they had where they said the reelection of Donald Trump was the biggest threat to the American-British special relationship, and that the reelection of Trump had to be stopped. Now imagine when that is a policy position of the British government. So, in my opinion, there were massive election irregularities in 2020. I don't think it's clear at all who won that election. I think there were all kinds of bizarre things that went on. I experienced some of this both in 2022 when I ran against Schumer, 2024 when I ran against Gillibrand. So that's part of freedom of speech. Americans have the right to ask questions, right? They have a right to have their concerns heard, but they wanted to penalize that. They didn't want anyone investigating it, so they wanted to extract a very high price to say, if you thought there was a question, you're an election denier, you're an insurrectionist. And I think some of the things that have come out is that this character, Ray Epps, you know the name?
It doesn't ring a bell.
He was an FBI plant, basically, who supposedly was with, I forget which, the Proud Boys or one of these groups. And he was the one sending all the emails saying, this is our day. We're going to go there. We're going to storm this. It turns out he had something like 20 phone calls with Nancy Pelosi the 2 weeks before January 6th.
Wow.
Yeah. So this, the truth has to come out. I'm hoping that's one of the things that Trump intends to do. I think the appointment of Kash Patel in that regard as director of the FBI could be very exciting. Were you aware that Kash Patel has written children's books?
No, all I know about him is that the certain segments of society do not want him to obtain that position.
Yeah, well, he's written very funny children's books where he calls himself Cash the something discoverer.
Oh, wow.
And it's a story. Hold on, I'm going to look at it so I'm reading to you accurately what he talks about, because it's very, very funny. Yeah, Cash, the distinguished discoverer who uncovers a plot against a character named King Donald. And the characters plotting against King Donald are Hillary Queenton,
Oh, God.
Baron von Biden, Kamala, and the Shifty Knight.
Oh,
And then
boy.
and then in his third book, he has something called the Dragon of Jalapenos. Think
Mm,
of the initials DOJ, right? The Dragon
wow.
of Jalapenos, which has been misled by the Shifty Knight. And the Cash, the discoverer, the distinguished discoverer, straightens out the Dragon of Jalapenos, which recognizes that it's made a mistake. And the Dragon of Jalapenos sends Hillary Clinton and these others out of the kingdom. And I think, frankly, that's the right attitude because if you're in a totalitarian state or you want a dictatorship, you have to make people scared, right? You're not supposed to ridicule them. You're not supposed to make fun of the Department of Justice by calling it the Dragon of Jalapenos. So it's the right attitude for someone who's going to try and make a dent and clean up this mess, is to hold these really treasonous and corrupt people in high disregard. And that's why people like Bill Webster, the former head of the FBI and former head of the CIA, who, by the way, was a long-standing enemy of Lyndon LaRouche, who worked very directly on putting LaRouche and a couple dozen of my associates in prison. So Bill Webster comes out of the, I don't know, he's 100 years old, and he comes out with a letter to the US Senate basically telling them if they confirm the nominations of Tulsi Gabbard as Director of National Intelligence and Kash Patel as Director of the FBI, that they are jeopardizing everyone's security for generations to come.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Wow. So, I was talking to a friend of mine last night, and my friend was saying that Trump is not out of the woods, that something could happen between now and January 20th, or maybe after January 20th. So, if January 6th was a fabrication, then we should be prepared for a lot more. Am I correct?
I think you're absolutely right. I think these periods leading into his inauguration are very dangerous. I mean, look, Biden just authorized what I said, $8 billion more to Israel. Right.
Right,
So what are we just going to exterminate every last Palestinian before Trump takes office? And Trump hasn't even, I mean, frankly, he's a bit on the pro-Zionist side, so he
right,
hasn't even indicated that he's going to put a stop to it. But I know he doesn't like Bibi Netanyahu. And
okay.
I don't think he wants a war with Iran. So they're jamming that up. Then they announced another $2.25 billion to Ukraine. Ukraine has launched, I think now, 4 separate rounds of ATACMS missiles into Russia just in the last week. So they are definitely doing everything they can to undermine Trump before he takes office, to make the war situation something from which he can't extricate us. And you saw what Putin said over Thanksgiving. He said that he worried for Trump's life. And I think that's a legitimate threat. And I hope Trump is taking every precaution, and some of his appointees like Tulsi Gabbard and Kash Patel, I hope they are taking important precautions as well.
Everything that you're saying is very interesting, but a lot of people just listen to the mainstream media and they buy into it. So they actually um adhere to the doctrine of what they're saying, but in reality, they're thinking against their own well-being and survival, right?
They are. Now, I'm happy to say that fewer and fewer and fewer people are listening to the mainstream media. They're shedding, MSNBC, right? They're going to sell them off because no one's watching anymore, which, that was taken over by John Brennan. I mean, imagine saying we have free press when the head of the CIA becomes a major news anchor at MSNBC,
Oh my
right?
God.
So they're going bankrupt. But I think what they have, even though people don't watch them or they know they're lying, people become afraid because of the name calling. Just like you're not supposed to say genocide or you're not supposed to question the elections. But if someone has the courage to bring it up, then other people admit, oh, yeah, you're right. I know that's true. And they will bring it up.
So when Donald Trump decided to run in 2015, Diane, when Trump decided to run in 2015, he had his show on NBC, The Apprentice, right? So he more or less did this. He didn't expect to win, and he did this more or less, from what I'm told, as a publicity stunt.
No, I think he did expect to win. I think he intended to win. Roger Stone and Roger Stone is a kind of a maverick genius, as he really cracks me up because he does all. I don't know if you saw his latest email. It's the best and worst dressed politicians.
Oh, wow.
He thinks Mayor Adams is one of the best dressed people in politics, which is funny. Anyway, but Roger Stone is very accurate. He's got his finger on the pulse. He had urged Trump to run, I think earlier. Trump ran as an independent with the Reform Party, I believe. So I think Trump actually thought he could win. He doesn't strike me as the kind of person who I think he has too much of an ego to do something that he didn't think he was going to win. I think that he thought that he could, and certainly having this TV program and being a billionaire put him in a position to wage the kind of fight, for example, that Lyndon LaRouche was not in that position when they came after him.
Okay, but the thing is, going back to 2015, I'm sure Trump realized that he was a long shot at that point.
Yeah.
Okay, so how does a long shot who who might not win evolve into somebody who stands up to the establishment and says, "Make my day"?
Well, happily, he's a kind of a fighter, and he had a movement. You know, they really did the work. I do a lot of street organizing, as you know, that's how we got the signatures. We would meet people who said, I did phone banking for Trump. In other words, he had a real grassroots base. He wasn't depending on smoke and mirrors or some kind of opinion poll. There were people all over the United States who went in and made phone calls, who went door to door. You see all the Trump flags and the signs and the banners. He had those rallies with 50,000 people showing up. That's one of the things that made it, frankly, not seem so credible that Biden could win the election. If you think about the crowds that Trump drew wherever he spoke, and then Biden, I don't know if you remember, in 2020, Biden would have these little car caravans, and there'd be like 6 cars and 15 people. And they kept him in his basement because they didn't want people to see that he was already suffering from signs of dementia. So he didn't campaign. I mean, it just really didn't seem plausible that he won the election in the way that they say. But of course, you're not allowed to question that.
So in 2020, on January 6th, was Trump's life in danger?
You mean 2021 on January 6th?
2021,
Yeah.
sorry.
Um, Probably yes, but not in that way. They more wanted to destroy his reputation, right? They wanted to say that he had ordered people to do this. They wanted to impeach him, as they did, right? Saying that he had called for an insurrection.
Right.
So I think they wanted to set him up to be blamed for what they hoped. And I believe they wanted it to be much worse, actually, because remember, the line was the Trump supporters are all a bunch of gun nuts and they're going to come there and they're all going to be armed. Imagine if they had been armed. They weren't, right? So it was not a bloody mess. But I think that the people who orchestrated this actually were hoping that they were armed and that you could really call it an insurrection. Because if you think about what we're calling an insurrection, I mean, they didn't burn anything down, right? They broke some windows getting in, but there was no massive property damage. No one got shot except for a Trump supporter by a Capitol police officer. So they didn't get what they wanted, but nonetheless, the media, being what it is, went absolutely bonkers, called it an insurrection, and made everybody completely hysterical about it.
So what about Pelosi and AOC? Was their lives in danger on that day?
No.
But the media made it out to think that it was that way.
Right. That's part of the hysteria. I mean, it's just like, what do they tell us to arm Ukraine against Russia? If we don't stop Putin, he's going to take over all of Europe. And the next thing, I mean, we had a war against Iraq because if we didn't fight them over there, they were going to come here, like we were in jeopardy of Iraq invading the United States. It's, we have been so manipulated. It is so terrible. The American people have been very much controlled through fear, which is how you get crisis management, especially when you have a weak government, which is not popular, as you had in the case of W. Bush. Remember in the 2000 election, which was very close, both Bush and Gore were horrible candidates. And LaRouche actually warned when Bush announced that Ashcroft was his nominee for attorney general. LaRouche said, watch out, this guy doesn't have a strong mandate. He's going to look for a Reichstag fire event. He's going to need some kind of event that will allow him to ram through his policies because he has no mandate. And of course, 9 months later, we had 9/11. Just a question, but it certainly worked to ram through a whole policy agenda that these people had.
Wow. So, you know, it's very interesting with so many people that have a higher education. They they've gone to college. They supposedly learned how to think. Um, so Diane, I lost you there.
I just
So so if there's so many educated people in this country that graduated from college, how come we as a country allow all this stuff to happen?
I think it's just the media brainwashing, and it is this thing of doing stuff through fear, right? People have gotten lazy with the way they think about things. They want to be popular. They don't want to go against what they perceive as public opinion.
Okay. So what's what should we learn from January 6th, 2021 and January 6th, 2025?
Well, I mean, January 6th, we should learn that we shouldn't trust these intelligence agencies. We should learn that we should get someone like Kash Patel in there to clean up the mess. And we should purge ourselves of the mainstream news media narrative of all of this nonsense.
So it's going to be an interesting, well, 2 weeks until the inauguration, and it's going to be an interesting 4 years. So, Diane, I'd like to have you back from time to time to share your thoughts on how everything is going.
Well, thanks very much. I'd be glad to be here.
Okay. So you're listening to Diane Sare. I'm Cynthia Pooler. This is Issues That Matter. And if you like the show, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Diane, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Happy New Year.
Thank you.